All right, welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk about installing and configuring TagoCore on edge devices, the second webinar of the series. I'm pretty sure that we have some people from the first webinar. If not, welcome to the series. To go back to the first one, you can find the previous webinar of the series under tago.io/videos. And today we're going to go back to installing on the edge. So we're going to do a quick introduction, live demonstration on how to install the TagoCore on the edge device. My name is Thiago. Today I'm here with Matt. He's our software developer and has been working with TagoCore since the beginning. Has some great news for us. Hope you guys enjoy. All right, so module 2, configuring on edge devices. What are the topics that we're gonna go through today? We're gonna go through a little bit of TagoCore architecture, just a swift back on the introduction to understand here which architecture are we going to use to install the TagoCore on the edge device. This includes the setup, installation, the command line interface. Also, we're gonna be enlightened a little bit on plugins and analysis clusters. And don't forget that on the end, we're gonna have a Q&A. So please feel free to answer your question. If you've been working with TagoCore, if you're new to TagoCore, we wanted to take your question anyway, gather your feedback. So please take advantage of that. Please feel free to present yourselves on the chat. I'll be engaging with you there as well. With no further ado, I would like to pass the word to Matt. Matt, you got it.
Thank you, Thiago. Thank you very much. So let's begin. My name is Matt, as Thiago has mentioned, and let's just jump right into it. First thing that we're going to talk about is the TagoCore architecture. Our goal here is slightly focused towards edge devices, but first we need to understand the types of architecture of TagoCore. Here we have a picture with, on the top, we have the northbound integration, so stuff like private cloud, big data, Tago.io, and in the middle we have the actual features of TagoCore. So we have data processing, meaning you can process data in TagoCore. You can create and install plugins via JavaScript. So if you want to create a plugin, you need to use the JavaScript language. You can also manage data, manage the TagoCore settings, and also manage your digital representation of your physical device. And last but not least, you can also mess around with connectors. So stuff like different types of connectors and different types of networks, you can do all of that in TagoCore. And at the bottom here, in the southbound integration, we have things that are a little bit more tangible. So sensors, actuators, equipments, and of course, a local network for TagoCore to run in. TagoCore is very diverse. It is very dynamic in the sense that there are multiple ways for you to install and use TagoCore. So for instance, you can install on the edge, which is the purpose of this webinar, but you can also install it in the cloud. So on the edge, of course, it is faster because you do have the advantage of being closer to you. So it processes data faster, but it isn't as reliable in the cloud because cloud has backup and has a bunch of other stuff that simply sometimes we cannot achieve by just simply running TagoCore on an edge computing station. And these are just two examples of the types of architectures that we can implement with TagoCore. But of course, there are many more that you can think about and use. So these are a couple of hardwares. We're working directly with some hardware providers to make sure that TagoCore runs smoothly on pretty much any kind of hardware. So Siemens, Aeon, and Dragino are a couple of the providers that we're working with in order to have a very nice experience with TagoCore. Now, of course, TagoCore does run on every type of Linux machine, but this is just an extra sort of collaboration to make sure that TagoCore is perfect for these specific devices. And another cool feature that we already have mentioned in the beginning of the presentation is plugins. So TagoCore can install plugins, meaning you can install plugins in TagoCore. And there are multiple types of plugins. So you have database plugins, you have network plugins, and database. In the database section, you have, for instance, MySQL or PostgreSQL, SQLite even. And in the network section, you have, for instance, Everynet, you have Helium, you have Tectelic. So a bunch of different types of networks that you can use. You can install the plugins and use in your TagoCore. And you can use these plugins to build an application in TagoCore. You can mix and match different types of plugins, and there are a ton of different types. So databases and networks and connectors are not the only types available, are not the only plugin types available in TagoCore. There are many others which you can check out by visiting the TagoCore store inside of the TagoCore application. And here, just circling back to the architecture section, we have a first architecture. So this is just a sample of an architecture that you can build with TagoCore. In this scenario, we have TagoCore running on an edge computing station. Devices are sending data to TagoCore, and then both of the TagoCore instances are sending data to TagoIO, and TagoIO is forwarding this data to TagoRun. Now, you don't need to store the data in TagoIO. You can, for instance, just simply view the data in TagoRun without ever storing data into TagoIO. This is another example. And in this scenario, we are receiving data via MQTT, and then we can sort of forward some data to the cloud and process some stuff there. You can sort of pick which kind of data you can process in the cloud. And then, of course, if you want to forward this data to a application called TagoRun for your end users. And TagoRun runs on the web, so you cannot download it like TagoCore to show it to your end users. And last but not least, we're going to focus on cluster in this presentation, because this is a this is a really important feature of TagoCore, actually, because it allows you to connect multiple TagoCore instances as a cluster, as a single group. And the purpose of cluster is mostly to increase the reliability and performance of your instances. And if you guys do have trouble understanding clusters, don't worry, we're going to cover them in this webinar, but think of it like a server with many nodes or many instances. It is pretty much that. All right, guys, I think it's time for our demo. I'm really excited because we're going to work with a Raspberry Pi computer machine right here by my side. So I'm really excited to be showing everyone this demo. So let's begin. All right, guys. So the first thing, as Thiago has mentioned, we're going to be focusing on the setup and installation of TagoCore. Now, since we are focused on a edge webinar, right, an edge device webinar, I think the most fitting way to install and show the setup is in an edge computing station or an edge computer, such as a Raspberry Pi. So I have one right beside me here in my desk, and we're going to do the whole process inside of this machine. I'm going to do it in my Mac through SSH into my Raspberry Pi. So without further ado, let's begin. So let me just grab my terminal here. There we go. Now, what we have here is my Raspberry Pi. All right. And I created a little folder called TagoCore, and we're going to go through the whole process of downloading TagoCore, extracting it, running it, and then configuring the initial setup for this computer. Now, I already have downloaded the newest version of TagoCore. So if I just type ls here, you can see that the latest version is downloaded and it is ready to be extracted. But if you didn't download the latest version, you can do so by going over to downloads at .tagocore.com. And in this case, I downloaded the version 0.5.0. If I click here, it will show all the different types of versions that we have available for this particular build. And in my case, for my Raspberry, the ideal or compatible version really is the TagoCore version 0.5.0 Linux ARM v7. So this is the one that I want to download for my Rasp. And in fact, I already have. So if we go back to our terminal here, and I'm going to be explaining the second tab in just a a while. But what we want to do here is extract this version because it is in a tar.gz format, which means that it is compressed and we need to extract the actual binary from inside of this file. To do that, it's actually very simple. All we're going to type is this little command and extract my file. And there we go. Now our file is extracted. We have it right here called TagoCore. So I'm just going to be running it, as simple as typing TagoCore. There we go. Now TagoCore is running, but as you can see, nothing really happened. And this is expected because TagoCore needs some parameters in order for it to run. Now we're not going to be focusing just now on the CLI options. And when I mean CLI, I think everybody knows that I mean these little commands right here. We're going to focus on them. We're going to talk about them a little bit later in the presentation. First, I want to show how easy it is to set up and configure your initial TagoCore. So for that, we want to run TagoCore. All right, and to run, it's actually very simple. All we have to type is TagoCore start, and I'm actually going to pass an additional parameter here, which is this one. And what this does basically, and this is in our CLI documentation, if you just type --help, what this does is it runs TagoCore in the foreground instead of the background. So you can see all the logs in real time, but once you close the terminal window, TagoCore stops running. So it's mostly for debugging. You wouldn't leave this running in an edge device. You prefer that TagoCore runs in the background because you can actually close the terminal window and everything will still work. But since this is just a demonstration, we want to see the actual logs in the window right here. So we're going to start TagoCore. We're going to wait a little bit, and TagoCore will boot up. It will initiate and start all the plugins. And there we go. TagoCore version 0.5.0 is ready, which is amazing, which is what we wanted. Now I am going to actually be visiting this local URL by copying this link on my network and pasting it in a new window. And there we go. TagoCore is already started, really, but it is not configured. And the reason that it is not is because we have a fresh installation, we have a fresh version of TagoCore. So we need to inform a couple of parameters. First thing, if we press next here, is the master password. And this is a password, actually an additional password that you need to provide to perform sort of specific and sensitive actions in the system. So when you create a new account, for instance, you need to provide this master password so we know that it's really you that is trying to do this action. When you want to also factory reset TagoCore, which means basically reset TagoCore to its default factory settings, you also need to provide this master password. So sensitive actions, actions that have a lot of impact on the application, always will require a master password from you. And the least amount of characters that you can provide here is 6. So you need to have some sort of at least semi-strong password. I'm going to be setting my default password here on the password and on the confirmation and just press next. Now that we have configured the master password, we need to pick a database plugin. TagoCore needs a database plugin. Without it, TagoCore cannot store anything because TagoCore by itself is just an empty shell full of features, and we need to actually store the data from your devices, analysis, actions, and all that sort of stuff in a database. And to do that, we need a database plugin. Now, I think it is very fitting that we select the SQLite database just because we are working on an edge device, a Raspberry Pi, and I think it's important that we learn how the default option, which is already built in, by the way, works. You can select MySQL or PostgreSQL in order to have an external database on AWS, on Azure, or really in your own local network. But in this case, we're gonna use the SQLite database. I'm just going to be selecting SQLite right here and press next. Now we need to configure SQLite, and by default, it is already configured. As you can see, it's asking us for the database file and it shows the default database location that it is going to be saving the database file. And I think this is good. For me, at least, this feels all right. So I'm just going to be pressing save. All right, now our database plugin is connected and ready to be used, meaning our database SQLite now has created the file, has an active connection to the file, so to speak, and it is ready to save stuff in that file. So let's press continue, and now we go to the next step, which is to create an account so users can log in to TagoCore. So we need to provide a full name. Now I'm just going to be putting Matt here, just so we can go along quicker. The username will also be Matt, but all lowercase. And the password, I'm going to be putting a default password. And the hint is actually a little text that you can provide in case you ever forget your password. So you can give a hint to yourself in the future in case you forget the password for this specific username, which is Matt. And in this case, what I'm going to do is set my password hint as default password that I use. I think that's better. Yeah, feels more natural. Default password that I use. So whenever I see this, I know, hey, this is my default password. Okay, so it is this, this, and this. Let's just press create account. And we need to provide the master password because this is a sensitive action. We're going to give credentials to somebody who logs in with these credentials. So let's put our master password. And we have created an account. And with this account, we can then sign into TagoCore. Now, at this moment, we only require a single account for TagoCore, but in the future, we do have plans to have different types of users with different types of access levels. For now, though, we only support a single user, and the user doesn't have any specific privileges because, again, it's just one user. So let's set my username here and my password. And before I proceed, let me just put the wrong password here. And as you can see, it says invalid password. Your password hint is the default password that I use. And this is the actual text that we provided in the sign up process. Once you set the actual correct password, though, you can then log into TagoCore. Let me just agree to the usage data. Now, TagoCore is already protected, and this is one of the main features of version 0.5.0, meaning external people cannot do any type or cannot perform any type of request to your TagoCore server without an authorization token. So if somebody in your own local network wants to send some type of request to TagoCore, it cannot do so without an appropriate device or account token. All right, guys, so this concludes our setup and installation. All right, so this is a simple process, and as you can see, TagoCore is configured. We can refresh, we can then log out on this button right here and log back in again. Now we want to focus a little bit on CLI, because I mentioned that we were going to go back to the CLI and explain how everything works. So let me just grab my CLI right here. Now TagoCore is running on the foreground, and that is fine. But what we want to do now is run TagoCore in the background, because while we run TagoCore, we want to mess around or play around with the CLI commands. So for this, I'm going to be removing that flag and just start TagoCore in the background. And as you can see, it just started TagoCore. It says the PID, which is the process ID of TagoCore, and the server is up and running. With this, as I have mentioned, the CLI is now free, meaning we can then perform some additional commands without worrying about TagoCore stopping. So let me clear the terminal and let me just type TagoCore so we can see all the commands. And there we go. These are all the commands that TagoCore has. So if we go back to our browser and refresh this, as you can see, TagoCore is still running because we have started TagoCore in the background, but it is still running. So what we want to do is first learn how this works, plugin install. And what this does is it basically installs a plugin that you can use, just like you would as For instance, if you went to the store and pressed download, it's the same thing, but you can actually automate this because it is a CLI command. So the way this works is very simple. You first type TagoCore, plugin install, and then you need to provide the ID of the plugin that you want to install. Now, the only way that you can acquire a plugin ID at this moment is through the store. But we do have plans in the future to provide a sort of search here in the very CLI, so you can search different types of plugin by their name. For now, though, the only way is the store. So we go to the store, and let's say that I want to install, for instance, let me just pick a plugin here, the EveryNet LoRaWAN. So let's say I want to install this plugin. All you have to do is click the plugin and grab its ID right here at the top. If I copy this, go back to my terminal and paste it right here, we will install the EveryNet LoRaWAN via the command line. And as you can see, it is installing. So let's just wait a bit. And there we go. It installed the plugin properly. Now, every time that you do some sort of command that modifies the state of TagoCore via the command line, you do need to restart TagoCore. So let's just press TagoCore restart. And the reason for that is because since TagoCore is running on the background, it doesn't understand that you just installed a plugin. So we need to sort of refresh TagoCore in order for us to send a notification saying, hey, there's a new plugin, please load it. That's pretty much the way it works. Now, there are some additional commands here, such as plugin versions. But before we proceed, let's just refresh the page and see if this plugin was installed. And it was. As you can see, it says EveryNet LoRaWAN, and it is installed right here. We can edit its configuration. So the same principle applies to all of the plugins in the plugin store. We do have additional commands. So for instance, we have plugin versions. But before I do that, let me just type the plugin list because I love this command. All we're going to do is type TagoCore plugin list. There we go. And by the way, I'm not sure if you guys can see I just realized I'm not sure if you guys can see the terminal very well. The font, it isn't that big, so I'm just going to be increasing it. All right. Now, as you can see, we have typed TagoCore plugin list, and it shows a list of all installed plugins. Now, it doesn't show a list of built-in plugins, such as SQLite, but every plugin that we have installed via the store shows up here. We have its ID, the name, and also the slug, and you can install and uninstall plugins via this slug. So for instance, this plugin right here, it is not disabled, which means it is enabled and it is running normally. If we want to disable this plugin, all we have to do is type TagoCore, and I believe it is plugin disable, and we can paste either the ID or the slug of this plugin. I'm just going to be pasting the slug for now, just to show that it works with different types of IDs. And the plugin was disabled, but since we did a modification for TagoCore to understand this, we do need to restart TagoCore again. So in the meantime, let me just restart TagoCore, and let's keep on going here. We also have plugin list, and we also have plugin versions up here on the top. And this basically shows all versions of a plugin. So if I type TagoCore plugin versions, we can then use the ID or the slug. Let me use the ID. And there we go. It shows all versions of this particular EveryNet LoRaWAN plugin. Now, let me just clear all this noise right here, and let me just see all the options again, because it was getting a little bit too cluttered. So all the rest of the options work pretty much the same way. I'm not going to cover all of them, but we have the ability to uninstall via the ID or the slug of each plugin. We can disable, enable, and also update plugins to their latest compatible version. So if you have a very outdated plugin, all you need to do is type the plugin update and pass the plugin ID for you to update automatically the plugin. Before I proceed, though, to the next topic, let me just refresh TagoCore. And as you can see, EveryNet is disabled. And the reason is before we restarted TagoCore, we disabled the plugin. So in the list, it will show this plugin as disabled. And disabled plugins basically mean that this plugin is not even going to be started. Its code will never run as long as it is disabled. If I enabled it, once again, its code would automatically start. All right, guys, and I think this is it from the setup and also the CLI. So let's get going to the next topic, which is plugins and analysis. Now, plugins, I already have covered it, sort of mixing and matching with the CLI. So let's get going to our next topic, which is analysis. Now, since we are talking about running on the edge, it's important that we understand the different types of sort of resources that we can use to run your code or to perform certain types of analytics. And analysis is ideal for that. So analysis is basically a code that you can run in your server, in my case, Raspberry Pi. And it is very similar to the code that we run on Tago.io. So let's do a little test here. Let's create a new analysis and let's name it Webinar. And now we need to provide the binary executable and the analysis file path. What this means, in essential basic terms, is we need to provide a binary that will run a specific file that we provide. The strong aspect of analysis in TagoCore, what defines it is the ability that you can run any type of file that you want as long as you have a compiler or interpreter for that specific file. So let's say I want to run a Python file. All I need to do is provide the Python binary in my binary executable. And to find out where my Python binary is, all I have to do is type which Python. And if I copy this and paste it right here, I can select a Python file. And if I press run, it will execute a Python analysis. That's as simple as that. Now for our little demonstration here, I am going to be selecting Node. So if I type which node, I do have Node installed. So I'm just going to be copying this little string and pasting it right here. What we're setting here in the analysis is basically what we're saying is, hey, I want to execute this file that we're going to define in just a bit with this binary executable. That's pretty much it. Now for the file, I have prepared a little analysis demonstration. So let me just exit out of this TagoCore folder and go into one called analysis. Now this analysis is a little project in Node that I have built. And as you can see, we do have an index.js file. So what we're gonna do is I'm going to be copying this path of the file in my other monitor, and I'm just going to be pasting it right here. Just a second. There we go. So as you can see, this is the path of the analysis that I have created, home by analysis index.js. And the code for this index is actually extremely simple, guys. I'm actually going to show it to you guys. It is just this. All right. So here I have my Visual Studio Code. I have it SSH'd into my Raspberry Pi. And we can see that an analysis for TagoCore, when it runs on Node, is very similar to the way that an analysis runs on Tago.io. You do need the SDK in order to unlock the full capability of your analysis. And once you do that, you can then have access to the context or the scope. So if you go to Tago.io and select the snippet Hello World, it is pretty much the same as this one. And we need to test this out because this is what we want to see, right? We want to see an analysis actually running. So let me hide this program, this file, and let's just press save and run. And as you can see, it started my analysis. It said hello world because this was our first log in that file. It showed my context with the analysis ID, and it showed my scope, which is an empty array because we're just testing this analysis, which means we don't have any scope. Scope is the extra data that you can pass when invoking an analysis. So since we are manually invoking, it doesn't have any external data. So this is it, guys. It's very simple to run an analysis. Again, you just need to select the binary executable. And I hope I was clear on this. And if I wasn't, please feel free to ask questions. But what we want to set in this field is the executable, which means the interpreter or the compiler or whatever you want that can actually run the following file. In the future, we do plan on adding some extra flags here, all right? Meaning that, for instance, you could in the future set GCC here and pass a bunch of additional flags and then set, for instance, a C file, like so. And then you could compile and execute this file in a single line with GCC parameters. So you could generate the object file and then execute the file. And whenever you sort of do a printf in C, it would show up here because we connect the output of the program with the input of the console. So it's all automatically is what I'm trying to say. But again, we don't have additional parameters for now. In the future, we definitely will. All right, I think it's time for our last topic, and it is cluster. Now, this is a little bit tricky, but I'm going to try and make it as simple as possible to understand. First, let's go to our home and let's leave analysis B. To use clusters in TagoCore, you need to first have a TagoIO profile. I have one here called TagoCore. It has a simple dashboard, but we're not going to get into that. And if I press cores here, you can actually see that I have a standalone instance. Now, this instance right here, what it is basically is a simple instance that I had a couple of days ago. I registered it right here, but I haven't used it since. All right. Now, we're not focused on standalone instance, we're focused on cluster instances. So let's go to the cluster tab and let's create a new cluster. The name will be Webinar Cluster. I think this is a good name. You do have a limit of 3 clusters in your TagoIO profile, but let's not get into that. Now that you have your cluster, you also received a cluster token. To run a specific TagoCore instance in a cluster, you need to start that instance with this cluster token. So let's go back to our Raspberry Pi terminal and let's go back to our TagoCore folder. Let's clear the terminal and see what was, okay. So here we have TagoCore running. First thing that we're gonna do is stop TagoCore. All right, now that we have stopped TagoCore, what we want to do is basically start TagoCore once again, but we're going to pass an additional flag here. If I type -- cluster and I set an equal, or you can do in space, whatever works, you can then inform the cluster token. And this instance will start with a specific cluster. So this Raspberry Pi will be an instance of a greater cluster. I hope that makes sense. But if not, just wait a bit and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to be copying this token right here. I'm going to go back to my TagoCore. Now, all you have to do is paste the token right here, but it is a very sensitive information just because if somebody wants to connect to the same instance with the same token, they can. So I'm going to be pasting my token in my other screen, and I'm just going to be pressing start. There we go. Now our Raspberry Pi instance has started, and it doesn't have any noticeable differences just now, but this instance has just started and it is a cluster instance. Now, if I go back to my as you can see, my Raspberry, I'm just going to be refreshing this. And as you can see, we have to do this setup once more because the way clusters work is they have a special state. Each cluster has a state. So if you connect to a cluster, you need to provide the information for that state. We had provided the information for my standalone instance of Raspberry Pi, but the cluster state is still empty. And since we have connected to a brand new instance, a brand new cluster, we then have to sort of provide all the information for that cluster, meaning we need to provide the master password and also the database plugin. So let's just press next and let's set the same master password. So I hope I was clear when I said that each cluster has an empty state when they start, and no matter which type of instance connects to that cluster, it has to basically set the state of the cluster so every instance can sort of have the same functionality, so to speak. All right. So if I just set the password and install a plugin in this cluster instance, the next instance that connects to this cluster won't have to do that because the cluster state will be already set. All right. So let me just, I set my master password. Let's press next. And now we need to pick a database plugin. Now you'll notice that we don't have SQLite because SQLite is not compatible with clusters, because SQLite is a file in a single machine. It's a single file, so you can't really, in fact, you can't use two different instances, two different computers, and use the same database file because, again, they are different computers. So you can only select databases that are cluster compatible, meaning MySQL or PostgreSQL, because they connect to an external server. In this case, I am going to be picking PostgreSQL. I'm just going to be selecting this and press next. Now it's going to ask me, once it downloads, it's going to ask me the server origin, which is basically the server address. Now, I already have a database server running on AWS, so I'm just going to be pasting it right here. But of course, I'm not going to tell you guys the password. And there we go. Now, as you can see, it tried to connect locally to our PostgreSQL instance, but we don't have one running. So this is why we need to provide the correct information for this database plugin to connect. All right, I think I actually typed the wrong password. Oh, I think I put an extra space there. Let's try it again. And hopefully I typed the right password, otherwise we have to try again. Let's see though. What TagoCore is basically trying to do here is it's trying to first find the host, which is this host that I pasted right here. And of course, amazing, it could connect because we typed the right password. So Postgres now is fully connected to an external database. So if we start, as you can see, we already have a user in that database because I did some testing before. So you actually don't need to provide a user if you already have signed one up. All right. So the user here, I'm sorry for this name, really, because it's a simple name, 123, 123. I know it doesn't make much sense, but this is just a simple test that I did, which is why we can't provide another user. So if I just type this and press sign in, we can then sign in to our instance. And again, the only reason why I didn't set an account is because that specific database in AWS already had an existing account. And this is the way basically clusters work. If I go back to my TagoCore cluster and press refresh right here, we can actually see our Raspberry Pi. It is connected. The last connection was 4 minutes ago. And if I start any other type of instance with the same cluster token, they will appear right here. There isn't a limit of clusters at this moment of instances. And basically, whatever happens in an instance also happens to every single other instance. If I install a plugin in this Raspberry Pi, the plugin will be sort of added to the cluster state. And when a new instance connects to this cluster, it will automatically install that specific plugin that was installed in my Raspberry Pi. All right, now I would love to show you guys a second instance connected to this, but unfortunately, I don't have an extra Raspberry Pi. And I could use my Mac here, but honestly, I'm a little afraid it will just make things a little bit more confusing. You can have different types of machines. So you can, for instance, have a Raspberry Pi and a Mac connected to the same cluster group, but we don't recommend it. We recommend that all machines, all computers use the same type of configuration, processing power, platform, architecture. Ideally, everything should be the same in order to avoid errors. For instance, if there are multiple types of platforms and architectures in a single cluster instance, sometimes when you're installing a plugin, it may be compatible with a single instance, but for another instance, that specific plugin won't be compatible. So it's going to try to roll back, and you might sort of lose the plugin configuration because it isn't compatible. So what we recommend is all cluster instances ideally should have the same configuration. All right, guys? Okay, last thing. We do have a community right here. So if you guys want to ask questions, or maybe you found a bug, or maybe you just want to talk to us and get some ideas, stuff like that, or maybe even suggestions. If you want to provide suggestions to us, make sure you head over to our community right here. We also have an open source repository on GitHub. So if you want to provide feedback and maybe code a little bit there, implement a feature, of course, you are more than welcome to do so. And yeah, I think this is it, Thiago, from my side.
Awesome, Matt. Congratulations on a great presentation. It's great to see how TagoCore is coming along with this and understand that with this steps that you provided here today, what kind of power that we have and what can we do in it. For me, it's really limitless, and I only see good prospects from now on. We do have some questions here for you. First one is from Frank. His question is, have you tried TagoCore with RaspberryPI PC running with ARM-VM? And then he mentioned that he was also using Linux on that particular environment.
Okay, yeah, so hi, Frank, good question. Personally, I have not tried TagoCore on this particular setup. I do believe, however, it would work normally just because for all of the Linux machines that we have here in our labs, everything so far has worked out perfectly. So yeah, I believe that that should be just one more platform. It should work normally, but personally, I have not tried it.
All right, sounds good. I'll relay that to Frank as well. Then we have a question from Douglas. Douglas, nice to have you here. How to report a feature or bug? GitHub repository. So this will be that little audio icon that you just showed us, right, Matt? There you can relay some coding and some questions or features that we thought about, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so hi Douglas, great to see you again here. So Douglas is one of the people that is very involved in our community here, is always helping, is always doing tutorial. Very nice to see him around here. So yeah, Douglas, if you want to report a feature or a bug, first, if you want to sort of take a look in our code, that's fine. You can use our repository, or if you just want to report a bug, you can use our community. So really, whatever you feel more comfortable works.
Awesome. And then we have some other questions here, Matt. This one is a great one. When will TagoCore release its production version?
Oh, very nice question. So TagoCore currently is in version 0.5.0, and we're taking great steps in order to achieve the production build. It is going to take a couple of months still, just because we want to have a very strong, concise, and solid product when we finally achieve production. So production would be version 1.0.0. So in the upcoming months, we do have a plan in action to release TagoCore, the production version.
That's great to know. Great to know. Very exciting. And when we, on the same line of thought, when can we expect more plugins for TagoCore?
Oh, great question as well. Well, we're always developing plugins, really. So we do have some plugins coming up. I believe in this week or the next week, in the upcoming week, basically, we are planning to release a new plugin to connect to an external service that will act as a very nice analytics service. We're not going to sort of share too much detail right now, but always take a look in the store because we have a special team working specifically to build TagoCore plugins. So expect to see many, many plugins, if not weekly, at least a couple of them monthly.
That's amazing. Good to know. We also have a question from Benji. Is the source code for the plugins also available on GitHub? Will that become available?
Yeah, so for now, all of the code from our plugins is closed, so it is not open source. but we do have plans to release the code as a open source repository on GitHub. TagoCore's code is open source. Actually, TCore's code is open source, and we sort of build the TagoCore from the TCore repository. So it is open source, but right now, I don't think we have any plugins that are open source, but we do have plans to sort of open them to the community in the upcoming months as well.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I think that is all the questions that we have here from the Q&A. Benji, I hope that answers your question. And to wrap it up, what are any upcoming features from TagoCore that you want to bring it up, Matt? Anything hot coming up?
Yeah, so we have a couple of things. So the biggest feature that we have released is the ability to visualize TagoCore data in Tago.io. That we work very hard on that, and it looks very nice. Another thing that we have coming up is the ability to synchronize buckets with TagoCore. So we're going to do some very nice, I'm not going to reveal too much detail because it's still being developed, but we do have plans to sort of being able to synchronize TagoCore buckets with Tago.io. I believe that's one of the biggest features that is also being released in the upcoming months.
Very nice, very nice. Thanks for that answer. Also, Benji just complimented his last question in regards to the plugin. So in that case, can the plugin store be used when using the TCore OSS as well?
Yeah, so the plugin store is, just to get a little bit technical here, the plugin store is actually a plugin, okay? So if you run TCore, which again is open source in our repository, TCore comes sort of empty. It comes sort of like a shell in the sense that you don't have the plugin store and you don't have the Tago.io integration. These are specific plugins for TagoCore. So right now, at this moment, if you run TCore, of course, you can use the built-in SQLite module, but you cannot install any plugins just because simply there isn't the store there. But we are working on improving the repository, and we're working on also sort of releasing the plugin store and the Tago.io integration as separated modules, so we'll be able to install them on both TCore and TagoCore. I hope that answered your question.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for that answer as well, Matt. Looks like we are good. No more questions. I would like to thank everybody that joined today on the second series. Remembering again that to register for the next episode of this series, you can just go to tago.io/events. The next webinar should be there ready for you to register. Please feel free to share with family, friends, and colleagues. And thank you everybody for joining. Special thanks to Matt for putting all this together, and we'll see each other on the next webinar.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.